Hi everyone, thank you for joining the discussion. Today we're going to be looking at the question, how do we support our Black children within the education system? And we're joined by 4 brilliant panelists. Before I ask them to introduce themselves, I just want to explain to everybody what the principles are that we follow within these spaces. This is a series of discussions, so those of you that were able to join us last week for our webinar on young Black men sharing their experiences of the education system, you will be familiar with the principles that I'm going to share, and these just allow us to manage the space as effectively as possible. Please be respectful in the chat, introduce yourselves, engage in the discussions, ask questions, but please be wary of the language that you use and how you phrase the questions. If you do want to have these conversations on social media, you're more than welcome to, but if anybody does share their personal experience, please don't divulge anything without their explicit consent. And also just be conscious of the space that you're in. So if I do give you the mic when it is the question and answer time, or if you do ask a question in the chat, please be aware that we're on a time limited platform, so we will not be able to get through all of the questions. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. Nadine, do you want to start?
Okay, good afternoon all. Thank you, Muna, for inviting me to be part of this conversation. So my name is Nadine Bernard, and I've been working in education for roughly 15 years. I'm currently the head of a primary school in South East London and the founder of a project called I Am Here, We See You, which is an online platform and forthcoming social enterprise designed to redefine negative stereotypes of Black, Asian and ethnic minorities by showcasing role models and inspiring and empowering the next generation. So that was a mouthful there, but I'm involved in quite a lot of things. I'm really passionate about ensuring that our Black children get the best start in life. And yeah, thanks again, Muna, for inviting me. I just also will take this opportunity to explain to you why my screen is blank and you've just seen a photo of me. It's because I've just recently had a baby, and so I'm here multitasking. So that's just to make you all aware.
Thank you. Ziggy?
Beautiful. Congratulations on the birth of your child, Nadine. Firstly, my name is Ziggy Moore. I've been in education teaching for 13 years. My subject specialism is English. I'm the owner operator of More Education, a supplementary school specializing in English, maths, science. We have now included financial intelligence and world and African history. Primarily that's kind of what I do. I also work as a consultant, educational consultant, and as a teacher in schools, working with senior management to try to reduce exclusions by putting specific programs in places. So yeah, that's primarily what I do. So thank you very much for inviting me, Mona.
My pleasure, thank you. Melissa?
Thank you. First of all, congratulations on the baby. I remember having to multitask when they're little, and it's not easy. So well done for getting here on time, or getting here at all, actually. I'm Melissa Simmons. I always say I'm a born and bred Yorkshire lass. That's how I always describe myself. And I have a company called Miss Taught, and through that I try to educate children about autism. Because I believe that if we educate people about autism when they're younger, actually we can help give birth to a more inclusive community and society. I'm also an autistic adult, and I think we're very rare. There's such a big stigma, especially in the Black community, that we hide that we're autistic, or we don't pursue diagnosis for our children because of the stigma. I'm also a trustee at something called the Sheffield Parent Carer Forum, and that is to help all children and parents and carers of children who are disabled between the ages of 0 and 25. I'm also the mum to two children, and to me that's my most important role. Both my children are autistic, and that's how I realised I was autistic as well. But I just want this community and society to be as acceptable as it can be. And so one of the reasons I started Miss Talk was that I want to ensure that everybody my children come into contact with has an understanding of autism. So yeah, that's me.
Brilliant, thank you. And Manny?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me, Mina. Congratulations, Nadine. I'm hoping to join the club soon. I've actually got a little one on the way as well. So yeah. My name's Emmanuel Abayelu. I go by the name Manny. I'm a primary school teacher. I'm also a Senko. I teach and I work with young people with social, emotional, and mental health issues. I've been in education for coming up to 10 years. I started off as a teaching assistant, and I've been a qualified teacher for about 5 years. So my specialism is working with vulnerable young people, particularly those with social, emotional, mental health and behavioural issues. I'm also a governor for a school in Newham, East London, where I grew up. I decided to become a governor there last year. So that's my first governor post, something that's quite important to me. And I also I'm a director, one of 3 directors for a charity program called the Reach Out Project. And essentially it's a mentoring program to support disengaged Black boys in school and young boys who are on the brink of being groomed by gangs. So that's the work I do. The reason why I got into teaching was essentially because the experience that I had in school was such a negative one. I wanted to change the narrative. I wanted to support young Black boys and give them a different experience from what I had. And for those who were here last week, I mentioned, how I was excluded from school twice, once in primary, once in secondary, the trauma and the effect it had on me and on my family. And, I think I'm quite fortunate that I'm in the position that I'm in now, because many of my friends who were in that same situation as me, or who went through the type of treatment that I went through, many of them now, unfortunately, have made have made choices that unfortunately have put them in very vulnerable situations. And I think education has a massive part to play in the direction of our young people. So that's why I'm passionate about working with young people.
Absolutely, thank you. I think we can all agree that we've got an incredible panelists in front of us, so I'm really looking forward to this. Nadine, I'm going to start with you. So each of our panelists are going to have around 10 minutes to explore the question, how do we support our Black children within education? And when you reach the 10-minute mark, I'll give you a little bit of a sign, but Nadine, it's over to you.
Okay, thanks again all. Yeah, so seeing all children succeed has been an ingrained passion of mine, but we cannot deny the focus that is needed towards Black boys, as statistics are clear that they are being failed by the education system. It absolutely breaks my heart, and I feel deeply frustrated knowing that a child, just because of their gender and race, is much more likely to be excluded and have a poor educational experience. Now today I'm going to speak as not only from the perspective of a head teacher, but also as a mother and a classroom teacher. So as a mother, I have 3 Black boys, now aged 10, 8 and 2 months. And I have felt the fear and concern about whether they will make it through the educational system, not because of their behaviour, but because of other people's perception of them. So I want to give you an example of myself as a parent living in a predominantly white community, and they attended school. And one thing, my eldest son, he's a darker tone, and my younger son, who's 8, he's a lighter tone. And I think it's important to recognise that there's also, you have the white privilege, but to some extent there is that brown privilege. And my eldest son was always labelled as a bad boy for not doing very much. And whereas my lighter skinned boy was always the cute one, was always, oh, he's so lovely, he's so gorgeous. My eldest boy was has been basically ignored often throughout the education system when he was attending a school in that area. And even as babies attending the local library, I would get that people would express themselves negatively towards my eldest. And this actually became more and more apparent when he was in year 1, where the teacher, I went to a parents' evening and the teacher just constantly explained how he's a bad boy because he hangs around with these other children who actually looked just like my dark-skinned boy. And that for me was a prime example of where he was labelled. My youngest son at the time, he was still the cute, adorable child who everybody loved. Now, ironically, I decided to move my children from that school, and I moved into another school. And for now, my eldest son was doing amazingly. He was not the bad boy. He was not what they had said about him. And this other school that they were in, I placed them in a more diverse school, and my sons have been excelling since then. So I'm really, really great. Well, I shouldn't have to be grateful, but these are, for example, that's just one example of how being black and being a black, darker toned boy can have such an impact. So as a parent, I'm always quite conscious of that. Now, my younger son, who's 8, I have a fear as a parent about him going to secondary school, because he's actually very, very vocal. So at the moment, I am now starting to think about, okay, what secondary school will they go to? But my son is very opinionated. He loves to share his views, but often he's shut down. And when he's shut down, he gets frustrated, like any human being who is not allowed to have a voice. And so I'm finding myself worrying, because I know that within the educational system, children are not necessarily encouraged to have that voice, especially when they do not agree with the actual teacher. And I'm also very aware from having many young nephews, black boy nephews in my family, they are quickly demonized and criticized and labeled because they do have an opinion. So in terms of, as a parent, I'm having to train my children to encourage them to have a voice, because I never want them to lose that, but especially teach them how best to use it. I also have to ensure that my children can tell me anything about school. I always want to make sure I keep those pathways of communication open. So if anything does come up regarding school, where a teacher's treating them negatively in any way, I know that they're going to tell me. And lastly, my advice to any parent is to be actively involved in your child's school. So I'm now a parent governor at my son's school, and that is a great way to just ensure that the school can see that I'm working in partnership with them, but then also to have in-depth knowledge of what is happening in the school, so that can then be a basis for ensuring that my black boys get the absolute best, and not only my black boys, but the other black boys in that school. As a teacher, managing behaviour was a strength of mine, and I literally ended up in that stereotypical role of the black educator leading on behaviour in school. Now, I must add that I did enjoy this role and was passionate about making a difference. But the question is, why was I so good? Why did children of all races want to listen to me? Why did children of all races follow my instructions? Why did children of all races want to be in my class? Why do families of all races of children I've taught still, even over 10 years, still reach out to me now? And I just want to explain a bit about why I believe that is. It's because I took time to build positive relationships with children. I was firm, but fair. I listened. I found ways to make the children feel loved and special. I was able to have fun with the children and meet them at their level. I built positive relationships with not only them, but their parents. I took time to understand each child and have a holistic approach. I chose to constantly see the best in them when they did wrong and forgave them, and explicitly taught them different ways of managing their emotions. The children knew I believed in them and that I was sincere. And I think those things are really, really key. Regardless of race and gender, all children should have this experience with every teacher or within every school that they are taught in. Children can tell when they are not liked by their teachers and not wanted and not really listened to or understood. I do not believe that me being Black is the core reason for why a Black child will respond well to me. Yes, I must emphasize this, reputation matters, and that is something that needs to be addressed. However, being white does not stop a teacher or senior leader from caring enough to make an effort to build positive relationships with all Black boys and taking the time to listen and then trying to understand. We have to remember, I think it's really important that we all remember that the statutory curriculum has little reflection of Black boys and men. Therefore, it is easy for a Black boy to disengage with their learning. We know that research has proven that boys take longer to mature, so the way they demonstrate their disengagement may not align or not yet align with school expectations. And then when these negative behaviours are challenged in a way that are consistently punitive, it just chips away more and more of their self-esteem, in addition to all the negativity about themselves portrayed through the media and treatment from the police. And I can give you an example also of my sons, who actually, this is at the ages of, was it 7 and 8? They came and asked me, Mum, what do I do when I'm a teenager and a gang tries to stab me? And that's just one of the questions my sons have asked. And that's not because I've told them that when they're a teenager, they're likely to be stabbed, but actually that's come from things that they've seen on the media or things that they've heard, and it's made them be anxious about those possibilities. So we have to really think about all these external negative pressures that are on Black boys. We have to put ourselves in their shoes. The reality of systemic racism impacts Black boys and men the most. The statistics are evidence of this, from employment to healthcare and so forth. So in terms of the negativity that I have seen, I think it's really important that the way Black boys are treated in school is called out, so that when, and when I say called out, that we speak about the injustices and the negative treatments that they have encountered, so that there can be open discussions, and so that those behaviours and the way they have been treated can be challenged. So I'm just going to share some things of what I have seen, but mainly based on what other people have shared with me, so other parents and teachers who have witnessed the way some Black boys have been treated in school. And this is, I must emphasise, this is not me saying that all schools treat Black boys this way, but these are things that have happened. So a Black boy being sat outside the classroom on the floor for an entire lesson, a Black boy being put in another class lower than his age group for the majority of the academic year, because they were unlikely to pass their SATs results, their SATs tests. A Black boy being shouted at right directly in their face. A Black boy being kept for days in the head's office without the parent being informed. A Black boy in secondary school not attending school, but the school still marking the boy present and the parent not being informed. A Black boy's trauma not being addressed and just being labelled as a bad boy and then resulted in exclusion. A teacher being told by senior leadership to find a reason to make a Black boy excluded. this story, all of these are really upsetting, but this one in particular, because this teacher has now left education because they were told that if they do not find a way to get this black boy excluded, and because she refused to be part of that, they started bullying her at work, so she ended up leaving the education system. And also parents being told to find their black boy another school or they will be excluded. Now, all of these things, I think there needs to be more. I want to take this moment to encourage parents and school leaders and teachers to speak out about all of these injustices, because so many people are afraid to, because of repercussions on themselves, or parents not finding a platform to have their stories heard. So I just want to say that I will put in the chat my email address, but I do want to collate a lot of these stories and create a platform for them to be heard. So please do share with me. Lastly, I'll just speak as a head teacher. As I said, I'm passionate about all children succeeding, regardless of race, gender, whatever. Every child is special, every child is unique, every child deserves the very best. But as we know, the situation with Black boys, it's a national epidemic. It's something that needs to be addressed. Hence why we're taking that time to speak specifically about Black boys. Exclusion in itself, that is a trauma. I've always believed that. As a head teacher, I've never ever wanted or had the desire to exclude, even when staff members are looking at me like, am I crazy? Why am I not excluding that child? Because exclusion does not solve the problem. Exclusion does not help a child get better. I'm really passionate about finding the resources or the external support or whatever that might be to support that child, or working with the parents, whatever that might be. I'm really passionate about flipping, and I think school leaders should consider about flipping their curriculum. Again, we're in this current climate of COVID-19, where schools are having such a strong focus on trauma and PSHE. I think that should be standard. I think that should be what education is, what creates the foundation of education, and then all the academic elements will then be able to flow through so much more. Because at the moment, I find the education system is all about academic, and then children's social, emotional, mental health needs are being disregarded. And because of that, that's then having an impact on how a child, and Black boys in particular, who are not only going through certain traumas they might experience at school, but they're going through all those other external systemic traumas as well. So I think that's really important. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This topic.
I know. We're all really passionate about it. I really didn't want to stop you, but just to honour the time of all of our panellists. Yes. But you've mentioned so many things that I'm sure we've got questions coming in, and we'll be able to go back to some of those points later on. I'm going to ask Ziggy to go next, if that's okay.
Good afternoon. Apologies if my face looks a bit, if I don't look very happy. It's just that after hearing what Nadine had to say, it brought back a lot, the reality, or my reality in education, from as a 4-year-old boy starting school, all the way up until my experience in as a teacher. I'm sure, I think Nadine was she was very specific and kind enough to say she appreciates that this isn't across all schools, and this isn't the entire experience in education. However, I can say unapologetically that has everything that she named specifically when she was speaking about how Black boys are dealt with in school. That's been my experience, my personal experience, as I said, as a child from 4 years old. I think on my second day is when I received my first suspension, all the way up until being kicked out of my last school as a teacher. under all of those things in defending black boys and ensuring black boys aren't targeted by schools. So yeah, that's why my face, because that's the reality that we're actually living in, and I don't want it to be sugarcoated in any way. And I think, so yeah, thank you very much for that. And if my face is a bit serious, that's the reason why, because it brought it all straight back, flooding to me. As I said, my experience, I was a naughty boy. I am a naughty boy. I still am. In my late 30s, that's who and what I am, and I've had to embrace and accept that. So being that, I've always had trouble, and even during this period, I've had to reflect on my educational experiences. As I've been asked to kind of talk about it, people have been asking my opinions and join panels and things of the sort. And it's really made me really reflect. And I appreciate that my educational experience as a young black man, as a black boy, was slightly different. So I just kind of wanted to share that at first. My older brother, who would have arguably been more academic than myself, my parents took it upon themselves to do what a lot of parents do, which was send him to a school that was slightly further out, that may have been seen as a bit better and academically slightly better. So we are from Tottenham, and that's where that's where I grew up. That's where we live. So he was sent out to a school slightly further out called in Enfield. At the time, he was one of 4 black boys in the entire school. Now, my parents thought that was the best thing to do. However, they saw the psychological impact that had on my brother that still resonates with him to this day, even though he's in his mid-40s. Because of that, and because of how I was treated in primary school, where one year I came back from holiday and the head teacher pretty much was kind enough to pull my mum aside and say, we don't want him back anymore. Rather than permanently excluding him, just don't bring him back. For that reason, I went to a primarily all black independent school in North London, which completely changed my viewpoint. When I arrived at the school, I was very firm in the understanding that I wasn't very bright. I had terrible handwriting, and I wasn't used to spending a great deal of time in the classroom. I was used to looking into the classroom from outside through the door, because that's where I spent most, I'd say at least the last 2 years in mainstream primary school. However, flipping that on its head and going all the way through secondary school, confidence is the main thing going to a school that I did kind of instilled in me. And we've got to be honest and appreciate that that's what's being sapped out of our children when they are placed in the hands of the education system, as we are doing. Even though some of them may come out, or many of them come out with brilliant academic attainment and grades, that still doesn't mean that they haven't been affected. We tend to concentrate on those who, where we can see the impact. So they've been expelled, social emotional issues, so on and so forth. But we assume if they've come out with great grades that they haven't been affected, but they have. We fully have to understand and begin to acknowledge that this system that we're placing our children in, and the system in which they're being educated, is having a serious psychological effect on our children, which later go on to become adults. What we're seeing now is people in the workplace, because of what they suffered at school and where they were unable to express themselves. These are young black people go into the workplace and are unable to express themselves, that experience bullying due to racism, and are unable to speak about it. It's only maybe now in the last 2 or 3 weeks, which is why you're seeing this almost this purge where people are able to finally comfortably speak about their experiences. But that all starts in the schools. And even though the COVID-19 period has been very difficult for many people, and I appreciate that some people may have lost loved ones, it's kind of made things extremely acute, and we're able to speak about issues like this, because I think before this time we were running around doing so many different things that we were unable to really focus and pinpoint many of the issues that were really affecting us and our community. So Although it's been a difficult time, some positive is starting to come out of this, because it looks as if a lot of the distractions have now been taken away. So yeah, I'm just going to kind of look at some key things that I believe answering the question, what we need to do to support our children. So the first thing is going to be, and I think Nadine touched on it, is supporting grassroots organizations. Grassroots organizations, I think there are some people in here who've spoken about their organizations. I'm part of a grassroots organization or grassroots coalition called NME, which is No More Exclusions, that fights for the complete eradication of exclusions, because of what I've spoken about, because of what Nadine has spoken about, the complete trauma and devastation it causes to lives. Because in essence, pretty much from you exclude a child, that's pretty much a sentence, it's a death sentence in essence. You've put them on a fast track to prison. I think the numbers and statistics, you can go and research them for yourselves, but from you're excluded, it's very, very, very difficult to escape so many traps. I think Manny spoke about gangs, county lines, things like that. So there are other grassroots organizations. There's others I can think of. Another one would be NABS, National Association for Black Supplementary Schools. We're going to need a lot of support in regards to our supplementary schools. They have died off for the last, I'd say, decade. Whereas when I was growing up, there were a plethora of these schools. It was standard to attend a Saturday school or a Sunday school that helped you with your English, your maths, and things like that. And kind of, it was usually African and Black history. I remember in Akala's book, Natives, he referred to the importance of Black supplementary schools in there. There are lots and lots of grassroots organizations that we need, and they need us as well. Second one, somebody's just literally put it, a lot of parent pressure groups or parent groups regionally, because what tends to happen, unfortunately, is, or what I see is, in regards to the selection of schools, there doesn't seem to be a cohesive idea of where are the best places if we are going to place our children in the hands of outside of our control. What schools do we use? So I would suggest to anybody to create a parent group in your local borough. So if your local borough, I know we've got people from all over England here. So if you're in London, it might be, I don't know, Newham. I know Manny's in Newham, Waltham Forest. Create local parent groups for Black children where we are able to disseminate and pass off information. We know which schools are bullying and subjecting our children to these horrible things, and we don't send our children to those schools. We also are able to lobby these schools and ensure that we're able to support the children who are in these schools, because if we only send our children to specific schools in the borough, as we know who are in education, certain schools will be completely underfunded and they'll have to close down. But we tend to, I don't know, in the selection of schools, we tend not to really focus on how do they deal with Black children, what's the attainment of Black children, what's the rate that Black children are expelled. These aren't questions that are asked when we send our children to school, but very quickly we realize those are the questions that should have been asked. So if there's anybody in the room who's wondering, what can I do? Please set up a pressure group, a focus group. You can do it on, I don't know, Facebook or whatever, where you share information and the community is very, very clear on these. This is a good school. My Black child has been to this school. There are positive teachers. There are positive role models. They have a curriculum that infuses and encourages and builds confidence, whereas we know there are schools that aren't. So yeah, that would be the second thing. I think Nadine mentioned another one in combination with the pressure groups. It doesn't matter if you're a parent. I think Manny said that he's a governor just in the area in which he grew up. So it doesn't have to be, oh, my parent. I fell into that trap. I'll be honest with you. I became a governor of the school. Once my children left, I left, which was a massive mistake. It was a huge mistake. I should have stayed there, because during the time in which I was there, I know I prevented the exclusion of a lot of black children who would have been subjected to pretty much no due process, because how it works is the head teacher came in and goes, all right, we're getting rid of Johnny today. Everybody, yep, all right, Johnny's gone. There we go. So if it's your local area, or if it's the area which you grew up in, you don't live in that local area anymore, where you know there's going to be a high percentage of black children in that school, in that school, I would advise get on the governing body. If you can't get on the governing body, become one of those busybody parent-teacher associations where you're baking cookies or whatever it is and turning up to the Son of Fate and this, that, and the other. These are the type of things that we need, because our children need our presence there. It doesn't necessarily have to be parents only. As a community, we have to mobilize. So if you cannot get onto the governing body, ensure that you are at least present. And the final thing I am going to speak about is I'm an advocate of starting independent schools for black children. I was lucky enough to be a recipient of an education of all black schools. The community in which I live in, as I said, I live in Haringey. We have the Turkish community is an amazing community, very powerful. They have their own schools. Just north of here, we have a predominant Jewish community. They have their own schools. We work brilliantly. It's a very inclusive community. However, they understand the benefits of having their own schools, and I think we need to do so as well. I think we need those schools established in specific areas, because as we can see from the results and what's happening to our children, if we don't do something like that, it's gonna go beyond the point in which we can recover, and many of our young people are going to be lost beyond any measure that we'll be able to understand. This has been happening in our education system for over 50 years. I think I saw somebody post up about Steve McQueen was doing some research about a documentary based on the Bernard Cord book written in 1971. Just to put into context, before I leave, my dad was excluded from school. I was excluded from school, and I just about got my son before they started to target him. They remembered that his dad was a governor. That's the only reason they didn't get rid of him. So if we don't begin to do some serious things now as parents, as a community, as activists, it's going to be beyond measure. So I'm going to stop there, Muna, and I'll try and smile.
Ziggy, thank you so much, and so much information, but also suggestions on what people can do practically after this is over to make a start on change. So lots of things, and there are a few questions already coming in. Brilliant. Please use the question function. If you are asking questions, don't put it into the chat because it'll be hard to find later on. I'm going to ask Melissa to go next. Thank you again, Ziggy.
It feels like, how can I even, I don't feel qualified to talk, because the wealth and knowledge of what people have said, it's just really profound. And one thing I keep trying to stress to people is, as Black people, we are all suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. I genuinely believe that, because we are on a daily basis relentlessly experiencing microaggressions and racism from individuals, and it's hard, and it's not in our heads, we're not making it up, it's real. But we are in situations now where we almost have to trick ourselves into believing that it's not real just so we can get through the day. And that's gone on, that's happened for hundreds of years, but it's happening right now. I also keep telling people that there's two pandemics that we're struggling with now and trying to survive. One's COVID-19, the other one is the institutional racism that we're all experiencing right now, because it's very real. And like what Ziggy was saying, what's happening now is we are all kind of trapped in our homes, and we have time to think and we have time to reflect. And obviously what happened to George Floyd as well has triggered these emotions and feelings, and we're being really verbal now about what's really going on. I'm a parent to 2 children, and I always say that the most important thing for me is for my kids to be happy and healthy. And so the house is full of love and joy and laughter. But obviously we are not the only people who care for our children. We have to entrust our prized possession to strangers every day, the people in schools. We have to trust them with this jewel of ours. And it's a really difficult thing to do. And the other day I was having a conversation with my children, and I asked them both, how old were you when you first had your first black teacher? And they both went completely silent, because they've never had a black teacher. And I've never had a black teacher either, and I'm 41 years old and I've never had one. And I had my initial, between the ages of 8 and 16, I lived in London, but I am from Sheffield, and I've come back to Sheffield now. So even in the classrooms that I was in when I was in Sheffield, when I went to junior school, I was the only black girl in my class. When I went to London, there was a mixture. It was more multicultural. But then coming back to Sheffield for college, for university, I've only ever been the only black person in the class. And so what I talk about is something that we have to do. We have to mask who we are to keep ourselves safe. And as an autistic individual, that's something I have to do even more. So there's something called white spaces. And white spaces are organizations that are made up of rules that have been created by the white community. So the NHS, our banks, our schools, the laws, everything, they're all classed as white spaces. And white spaces are inherently, institutionally and systematically racist, because they are developed in a way that suits white people, not black people. And so when we think about our children in school, they are predominantly surrounded by white teachers who don't have an understanding of the culture, who don't have an understanding of our history, who don't have an understanding of the things and the pressures that our communities are under. And so our children have to go to these environments every day and mask who they are just to get by. And like Ziggy was saying, you know, he got thrown out of school, and my son has been, and my son's given me permission to talk about this. My son was in a situation once when he was a year 3, and when he was in infant school, we'd had a diagnosis of autism, but he was just a very quiet, chilled little boy. So I was never really worried about him. I mean, one of his quirks was he wore his Bob the Builder boots for like 7 months out of the year. So even when the sun was shining, he wore his Bob the Builder boots to school. So that was like my biggest problem. And then the other problem we had was he was a perfectionist. So they would have to pull his work away from him to photocopy it, to have evidence of the work he's done, because if he made any mistakes on it, he would rip it up. So for a long time, they didn't have a lot of evidence of what he did. But as he got to a year 3, which is, that's now, you're no longer in infant school, you're in junior school, the demand is greater. And he actually really struggled to cope with that demand. And he accidentally hit a teacher one day at school, and we got called into school. And I was really distraught. My husband was so angry. My husband didn't even come into the building. He just stayed in the playground. And they said, we're going to have to, I don't know if the word suspend or expel, but they said, well, you know, it was a Friday. They said, right, take him home today. He's going to have to take the rest of today off, and he'll come back to school on Monday. And that's how we've done it, because he has put his hand on a teacher. But something the headmaster did that I didn't realise at the time how wonderful it was. The headmaster looked at me and he said, "We're failing your son." He says, "But I promise you we will turn it around." And he went into the playground and he spoke to my husband, and my husband is a Jamaican man. And he spoke to my husband, I don't know what they discussed, and they shook hands at the end of the discussion, because I was really worried about that stigma of, you know, my son's done this, you know, we don't act this way, this isn't appropriate, you know, that feeling of shame and embarrassment. But he said, "We're failing and we'll turn it around." And he went and he spoke to my husband, and I don't, to this day, don't know what he said. And it took 2 years, but they did turn it around with my son. And it took a lot of work and it took a lot of commitment from the school, but they were willing to do it. And so for me, it's about, one of the ways we can support our children is making sure that we have a relationship with the school. And I understand that's easier said than done, because actually there are some schools where it is really hard to approach the teachers and the head. They can be incredibly ignorant or arrogant or not want to talk to us. I know of some situations where the parents aren't actually allowed on the school grounds because the breakdown in relationship has been that bad. So I'm not saying it's easy, but we need to know who these people are who are with our children for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's 35 hours out of the week. These people are with our children. I think it's also really important for us as individuals to educate ourselves on the needs of our children. And within our community, there's such a stigma, unfortunately, to disabilities, that we are sometimes unwilling to, it's not that we're unwilling, but we don't want to listen when teachers or outside agencies are saying that our children need that additional help. And so we ignore it and we will not pursue diagnosis. And I know lots of times of Senkos trying to talk to parents and parents not wanting to listen when they're saying, "We think your child may have ADHD or autism." And what happens then is, instead of them getting the correct diagnosis, our children are often misdiagnosed. And that is really detrimental to them. And I have seen the long-term effects of many children and families who have been misdiagnosed. Our children, often as they grow up, there are lots of autistic children or adults now who tend to go to prison or have mental health problems in the future, and it's because they haven't got the support that they needed earlier on. So it's incredibly important for us as parents to almost swallow our pride and be willing to get our children the help that they need. That there shouldn't be so much shame. And so within the community, we also have a responsibility as a community to be more willing to be compassionate and understanding towards our children who may act differently. You know, we see so many videos where a child will be misbehaving, and you'll see so many responses underneath, and they say, "I'd rather die than let my child act like that in public," or "they should beat the child," or there's so much negativity around disability that we're making our children suffer. And I don't want people to think I'm here berating the Black community. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm saying is we really need to be supporting our children. And the only way we can support our children is to swallow our pride, and to, even if we don't feel safe enough to go to a white space and communicate with the white individuals about our worries about our children, find somebody within the Black community who can help. There are educational psychologists who are Black. There are organisations like myself where you have Black people or Black Senkos who can help you with your children, or who can talk and converse with you. There's social media, there's lots of different avenues you can take. And I'm not saying it's easy, it's by no means easy, but our children are worth that extra fight. And I don't know what, I often think about where my life would be if I had gotten a diagnosis when I was younger. I would have less mental health problems. I would have maybe been more successful, although you can't really define success. But when I think about the struggles I had in school and in relationships and in my career, if I'd known I was autistic then instead of learning when I was 36, I just think that my health would be so much better. And so I don't want that to continue in the next generation. I don't really know what else to say. Because of my autistic brain, I kind of go from one thing to another. So I hope I've put my point across, and I hope it hasn't seemed like I am trying to pull down the community, because I hate when people try to do that. That isn't my intention. My intention is to just let you know that our children can be successes, but we have to be willing to be honest about what their struggles are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. So much to take away from that and to just pause and reflect with. So we just have one final contributor, Manny, and then after Manny is finished with his presentation, we're going to have a 2-minute break. So please be thinking about getting your questions in during that break as well. So Manny, I'll unmute you. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that, Melissa. I just want to say, I don't think your message in any way was criticizing the Black community. I think there's a lot of things you said in there, a lot of truths that I can relate to. I think what's quite interesting about this, I always like coming onto these sessions because I learn as much as I have the opportunity to share. And what's quite interesting is that many of what's been shared already is so similar that I don't think anything I'm going to be saying is exclusive in that sense. As I mentioned earlier, I was a young boy who I feel was failed by the education system. As I said before, I was excluded twice. First exclusion I suffered was in year 5. The second exclusion that I went through was in year 10. But if I'm being honest, it wasn't those exclusions that made me feel like I had been failed. It was what was happening in between. It was the mistreatment that I was getting from staff members. It was the labeling that I was getting from staff members. It was the way that my parents were being treated and how they weren't being communicated to. I think someone mentioned it already about, I think it was Nadine. That was quite normal in the school that I went to, where you could be disciplined and you could be in the head teacher's office and your parents would have no idea. And so me not knowing how bad that kind of situation is, I wasn't going home to tell my parents until they would find out a while after and then ask, well, that was the situation you went through. Why didn't you say anything? And so for me to answer this question, how do we support our black students, particularly our Black boys? I'm going to answer it from the perspective of a boy who had been failed from school. And what I'll do is I'll also try and add some suggestions as a teacher and give you some suggestions as to what it is that I would do or what I do currently to support Black boys in my school and in other schools through my project. First thing I'm going to say, and I say this everywhere I go, you need to have teachers who are kind and have empathy, because irrespective of race, those are probably one of the 2 most important traits when it comes to becoming a teacher. Not how great you are as a teacher, because there's many great teachers, but there's not as many people I have come across who are very kind and compassionate. I think on top of that, especially now, we need teachers who will aggressively self-reflect and consider how their stereotypes that they have and the prejudices that they have, how that impacts and how that influences the way that they teach, the way that they communicate with other staff members, the way that they treat our young people. Because whether it's malicious or not, there is clearly something fundamentally wrong in how the education system, but also how teachers and how leaders are dealing with our young people. It's not a coincidence that Black boys are the most likely to be excluded, 4 times more likely to be excluded than their white counterparts. For decades, they've had poor attainment. So there's something that we're seeing here it's not by mistake, it's not by accident, there's something intentional there or fundamentally wrong. And so I think one of the first things I always say is we need teachers who are have a lot of empathy, who have kindness. And I think actually the training that teachers get, it needs to it needs to embody that. And I think there also has to be something said about unconscious bias. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, actually, you know, teachers know what they're doing, or maybe that's something we shouldn't focus on. But actually, you shouldn't have people teaching our young people if they're not going to be considerate of the things that they say, the things that they do, how they interact with our young people, how they interact with the parents. So that's the first thing I'm going to say. The second thing is representation. Growing up in primary school, I grew up in a quite a racist area in Bermondsey in southeast London. And in that school, I was one of a few black students. And I don't think I saw a black teacher until I was about 11 or 12 when I started my secondary school. And the reason why I say representation matters, not because black teachers are the only ones that can support black boys, but because there's a self-identity problem with our young black boys. That's what I found, especially from the ones that I've spoken to. And so there is something to be said about the fact that you can't come what you don't see often. Me growing up in school, I never saw a black head teacher. I think I was about 25 when I saw the first black head teacher. And funny enough, it was Nadine who's in this chat, because I went to a leadership course. And for me, that was like, whoa. And it must be an issue with South, it must be a South London thing. I was in a room with other black leaders, and for me, that was inspirational. And so the reason why I say representation matters is because even if you're kind and even if you're compassionate and even if you have the best interests at heart for the young people, a black young boy can only relate to another young black person, to another black person. And that's because our cultural experiences are the same. You understand maybe possibly my language, the way that my family is set up. So there's that kind of understanding. And so that's not to say that black teachers are the only one that can support our black boys, but representation matters in that the black teachers are more likely to be their advocates than they are to be their antagonizers. Now, most of my negative experiences have come from white members of staff or members of staff from another country. And all I can say is when I've had those experiences, I've never felt comfortable in being able to approach someone to say, this is what I'm going through, this is the experience that I'm having. And so when you've got more black educators, you've got more confidence that you're able to speak about things, you start to see yourself and it becomes normalized now. So you're not just only seeing black people on the sports pitch, you're not only seeing them on the rap videos or whatever it is. It's normal to see a black educator. It's normal to see someone that's in your school and is normal and kind and nice and all of these things, but they look like you, they understand you. And so that's why I say representation matters. And just to make a point about that, my most influential teacher in school was a middle-aged white lady, English lady. And the reason why she was influential for me is because out of all of my teachers, even though we didn't have much in common, she was so far removed from my reality, my culture, my everything else. When I was going through issues or when I was getting in trouble, she was one of the only few teachers that said, you know what, Manny, if you've ever got a problem at lunchtime or break time, just come and sit into my classroom. And so I would go into her classroom when that issue, when issues would come about. And she'd just be sitting at her desk, reading a book, sipping a cup of tea. But what she gave me was a space. She made me realize that actually I see the issues that you're going through. And even though I might not be able to relate to you, I'm going to give you that space to deal with that. And if you need my support, I'm there. And so that's the reason why I say being compassionate and being kind and having empathy is important. And the representation is more so because we just don't have enough of it in the schools at the moment. The next thing I'm going to say is we need more black men in education, particularly in primary education. In most places that I've been to in terms of conferences, I see very few black men. I'm usually one of the only ones in the room. And I know that I'm an anomaly because when I go into these settings, the first thing people say is, oh, you're a teacher. And I say, yeah. They said, oh, okay, that's a surprise. What do you teach? So already the microaggressions have started. And in the beginning, I used to actually embrace it because I knew that what I was doing is I was breaking the stereotype that you couldn't just have a young black man from East London become a teacher. And so it's important for me to have black men in education just because, and I don't mean this to be offensive, a woman can't teach a boy how to be a man. She can nurture him, she can love him, but a woman can never teach a young boy how to be a man. And so what we're lacking in society at the moment is young men, young black men who have not only confidence in themselves, but really understand who they are. And I think having black men in education, why that would be beneficial to black boys is because one, black men can then teach young boys about masculinity and the notions of masculinity, the perspective of masculinity that they have. They can talk to them and explore issues around manhood. They can teach young boys that actually aggression isn't necessarily a strength, it's a weakness. They can actually teach them that communication is probably the best skill that you could have in your armory, as opposed to being the best fighter. And so what we've got in all races is we've got a generation of young boys who think that actually presenting themselves in an aggressive, just nasty, toxic male behaviors, they think it's normal. And the reason they think it's normal is because from a very young age, they're in an environment where, although they've got great teachers around them, they're not men. And so I always say that for me, I'm quite privileged to be a black male teacher, because when I walk into my classroom, I know that I'm breaking stereotypes one by one. And it's not just for my black students, it's also for all the other students. Because let's not be confused. The image that we have of black men, or the image that's portrayed to all of us about black men, is negative. And so even if you've got a role model like someone like Raheem Sterling, for example, a footballer, the newspapers are more likely to show us something negative about him, about a tattoo on his leg or something that he's done at night. So for me, I think it's very important to have black men in education, because we need more role models. And I think young black boys can't be what they can't see. It needs to be normalized. It needs to be normalized that actually it's okay for you to just want to be a family man, earn a good salary, have a job, be kind, be compassionate. And it's these little things that we take for granted, but we then wonder why we've got a society of people running around thinking it's all right to be topless and fighting each other in the streets, is because they're not being educated from young by men. And so that's one of the things I'm gonna just put as a suggestion. And then I say lastly, but one of the things that's quite heavy on my heart is I think the curriculum is also another issue that we have. The curriculum wasn't set up to benefit black students. I don't think it's there to benefit the working class in general. And the reason why I say that is because I saw a statistic recently. I think something like 7 to 10% of the population go to private schools. And when you look at the jobs that those people get, I think 30 to 40% of them become judges. They become MPs, they become the CEOs of all these organizations. And so what that tells you is that the education that they're receiving is very different from the education that we're receiving in our state schools. And so you have to understand that the curriculum that we teach our young people, that we're complicit in teaching, is very whitewashed as well. And it serves only one purpose, which is to create a working force that basically benefits those who are the judges and everyone else. And so I think the first thing I would do is the education system needs a massive reform. The first thing I'll do is I'd look at the curriculum. The curriculum is very whitewashed in the sense that every famous author that I can think of, every famous book or iconic book, every famous film that we watched, it was white faces, white authors, white poets. They were the ones at the face of all of these. And maybe you might have the one token book within the year in the curriculum. And so I think it's important that we that we diversify the text and the resources that we show, because I grew up in Newham, which is probably one of the most multicultural, diverse boroughs in like the whole of London, maybe in the whole of England, possibly. And so when I look in my classroom, I'm looking at Bengali kids, Pakistani kids, black kids, but the books and the text that we're reading don't represent any one of us. And so I think that's a massive problem that we're having at the moment in education. I think the other thing is, when we talk about Black history, I think it's quite offensive that we only have 1 month that's dedicated to Black history. I spoke to one of my mentees recently, and he said that he found it offensive because it almost kind of like reinforms the idea that we're a minority. That we're being marginalized. And so one of the suggestions that I would have is that Black history should be incorporated with our curriculum, full stop. It shouldn't have to be just one focus month. And on top of that, the history that you teach shouldn't be about slavery, because my history doesn't start from slavery. There's a history before that, there's a history beyond that. And so for me, I would look at, pre-colonialism. I would also teach a more true and more wholesome version of history, which is what was Britain's role in colonialism. Because if you want it to be relevant to the young people that live in this country, well, then be honest about the history that you're teaching. And then once you've done that, then teach young people what the role of Black people were in history, because many young Black people wouldn't know that there's been Black people here since the Tudor times. but yet we only talk about Windrush when we're talking about black people, or we only talk about slavery. And so I think the history that we teach has to be wholesome. It has to be a true account. And that's not to benefit black people. That's just to show, that's just to tell the truth. I think it's important that when you tell a story, you then give young people the opportunity to take from that what they want, but give them the whole story. Don't give them a little bit. Don't give them what you think is the truth, because then what you're doing is you're now creating a society where you've got people walking down on the streets in central London defending Winston Churchill without realizing that almost 2 years after Winston Churchill led them into that war, they voted for him out, but yet they think he's a hero. He might be the hero to them, but if they really understood their history, they might have a different view on that. And our young people don't see themselves within the education of the curriculum that they're getting. And I think lastly, what I'll say in terms of what we could do to support black students is, I guess in a more practical way, become governors, because when you become a governor, you hold the head teacher and the senior leadership team accountable. They not that they have to answer to you, but you get to question and challenge the decisions that they make. So if you look at the reports and you're seeing that the most exclusions that have happened within this academic year is majority African Caribbean boys, well, you're in a position to question that. And if they give you a reason that you think is valid enough, the next question is, well, what are you doing about that? And what can we do as a governing body to support you in that sense? That is the role of a governor, essentially, to be able to protect the students and have their best interest at heart. And to do that, you need to question and challenge what the people who are dealing and teaching your children, you get to question and challenge them on their decisions. And so it's not to berate the head teachers, it's not to become difficult, but it's to support them. And I think when you've got better representation in governing boards, when you've got better representation in senior leadership teams, I think you then start to see a change in the policies and the systems and the structures within school that influence how our young people are going to do well, to progress. And so I think it's very important now that we realize that there's been too much talking. I think we've discussed enough. I think now it's all about actions. And so one thing that I've done, and I hope this might help someone, particularly someone that might be afraid about how they could approach their senior leadership team, is I wrote a very heartfelt letter to my senior leadership team, which I'm going to send out tonight. And what I did is I became vulnerable, and I said to them, this is the experience that I experienced as a young black boy who was failed in school. This is the experience that I still have as a teacher, as an educator within your school. Sometimes I've even had microaggressions from my own colleagues that I just have to walk by because I don't want to be the argumentative one. I don't want to be too sensitive. And so I became vulnerable in that sense, but then I also challenged them, because a lot of schools have given out Black Lives statements. They've sent out letters, statements to families, statements to the pupils, and they've said, we're going to do all that we can to ensure that our school is anti-racist and blah, blah, blah. And that's great because they've acknowledged it. Some schools haven't even acknowledged that, but whatever. So when my school have acknowledged that, I've said to myself, I need to hold them to that then. And so what I've done in that letter is I basically said, I'm just confirming that you are sticking to what it is that you said in that letter. And here are some suggestions. And the suggestions are very similar to what I just said to you now. We need to give the young black people a space that they can explore the issues that they go through. Do it with black members of staff, ideally. Let them lead that. Let them talk about the racial inequalities that they've experienced. Let them explore it and have a safe space to be able to do that. Also for the staff members. I think the second thing that I mentioned also was to train your staff members on unconscious bias. And that might be by having black members of staff having to share their experiences for other members of staff to realize and understand that actually, whoa, I've been living in this white privilege, or I've been living in this privilege that I've had all these years without realizing that this is what some of my own colleagues are going through. Sometimes I might have even been the one that's inflicted that on them. Sometimes they're unaware, it's not always malicious. And so if you train members of staff, or at least give them an opportunity to learn, actually, how can I best speak to my colleagues? How can I best speak to my students? How can I best make sure that my practice is actually inclusive and it's not just a buzzword? That's another suggestion. And then I think I had a few other suggestions, just like, making sure that your texts are diversified, making sure that the history curriculum encompasses Black history throughout, not just in the 1 month. And I also challenged them to consider their pay, the pay ethnicity gap. I quoted in there that, reports have shown that Black people, even if they're as qualified, as skilled, with the same experience in most fields, they don't get paid the same as their white counterpart. That's just a fact. And the government was silly enough to put those facts out for everyone else to be able to find out. And so I also challenged them to say, when Black members of staff want to get into leadership, make sure that you review your processes and review your policies around how you're paying staff and giving staff members an equal opportunity to be able to actually apply for leadership positions without the fear that they're not going to get it because of their skin color. And if that means that you need to maybe erase their name and only look at the CV and the experience and the qualifications, then let that be it. If that means that you might need to, I don't know, not have a face-to-face interview and judge it based on what you can see, I don't know, but something needs to change, because fundamentally what we're seeing is there's not enough black leaders, there's not enough black people in the governing bodies, and at the same time, our young black students are failing year in, year out, and they're the most likely to be excluded. And like Ziggy said, when you exclude one of our young boys, you're basically saying to them, here's a passport to prison, here's a passport to approve, here's a passport to the alternative provisions. And some of them are great, but what you're doing is you're then excluding them, not just from school, but from society. And so, yes, I'm just going to leave it as that.
Manny, thank you so much. We went a little bit over, but I could see how passionate you were, and I could see everybody in the chat, so I didn't want to stop you. What we're going to do now is we're just going to have a couple of minutes break, so our panelists can catch their breath and get a glass of water. Please do keep bringing your questions in, and we'll resume at 5:15, and we'll try and get through as many of the questions as possible. So 2 minutes, and then we'll be back.
And the idea of a young black man going to therapy needs to be the idea of the norm, as opposed to there has to be something wrong with him. And I think where that message needs to come from is understanding that you've been in a hostile environment for the last, from the age of 4 to 16, which has had a huge detrimental effect on your well-being, your mental health. So I think if that's the clear message that our children, we understand what our children are going into and what they're possibly going to need coming out, and we destigmatize that idea, I think that would help a lot of our young men understand what they've been through and understand what they need to do in order to repair themselves.
Thank you. Manny, go on.
Yeah, I'm just going to second what Melissa and Ziggy said. Definitely around therapy, and like I've only recently just started therapy, and for me, one of the things I realized is that there's been so many things bottled up from my experiences in school, post school, and the reason why therapy was so far-fetched to me is because I grew up in a household, I grew up in a community where they haven't acknowledged that mental health is an actual thing, you know, that someone can have poor mental health. And so, like Ziggy was saying, we kind of need to destigmatize that whole notion. As families, talking from someone who didn't have the best relationship with a father who was present, it's very important for men, where possible, whether it's with a younger brother or whether it's a father, to speak to their sons. That whole notion that some cultures have where, you know, the child is meant to be seen and not heard, you need to break it down, because it doesn't work like that. Young men in general, but young black men, they need to be spoken to. And how do we know? Because if you look at the suicide rates, men kill each other at a ridiculous, not kill each other, men are dying at a ridiculous rate from suicide. And so, you know, the notions that we have of masculinity, which is that they need to be strong, they need to be this, they need to be that, actually it's all a facade. It's rubbish, because young men are killing themselves all around the world. The numbers for suicide rates are higher with men. And so particularly with young men that have been through the traumatic experience that they might have experienced in England, from home where possible, if they've got men who can be positive role models but actually talk to them. And, you know, boys don't like to talk, so you literally sometimes have to force it. It's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be annoying, but you have to force it out of them. So that's one of the things I would definitely suggest. And if possible, where possible, I know there's not many, but there are organizations that are specific on mentoring, one-to-one mentoring, group mentoring. My program, it is for that reason. Unfortunately, my program can't be in every single school. We're literally only based at one school, and so the logistics around that are difficult. But the reason why we do it is because the young boys that we have, we know that they're disengaged. We know that they need black people around them, black men around them. And so bridging the gap for us is important. So yeah, I would say definitely where possible, if men can speak to their young boys and understand that actually if that's not possible, that therapy is realistic and a viable option, then that would be definitely one of the things I would recommend.
And so, Muna, I think it's just really important just to make a point at this time, because someone asked a question or made the point of regarding black girls.
Yeah.
Because often, I know we've had, I think maybe a a stronger focus on boys because of the statistics around exclusions, XYZ. But in terms of, I think it's important that we recognise that there are lots of Black girls who are experiencing negativity and mistreatment and need that support as well. I being one of those girls who experienced a lot of things but was silent with it, and it only became more present as I went progressed through education and lacking self-esteem and having low confidence, and then that then projects in the way that I see myself and how I allow myself to be treated and so forth. So I think it's just really important point just to not forget our Black girls, that they also need support, although they may not project it as boys project it.
I agree with you totally, Nadine, when it comes to girls, because just the trauma around white girls putting their hands in your hair, I can't even explain how many times it's happened to me. It's now happening to my daughter. It's happening to little girls that I know who are just starting school, and it's relentless. And my daughter's just about to start secondary school, and one of the questions I had to ask is, how many Black and mixed race girls do you have here? I had to educate the woman who was taking us around about what my concerns will be about girls putting their hands in her hair, and teachers as well. So yeah, I completely 100% agree with you, Nadine.
Thank you. And the only thing I would add to that is last week we had the discussion around how schools fail Black boys, and we asked a number of young men, including Manny, to share their experiences of the education system. In a couple of weeks' time, we'll be holding a similar discussion with young girls. So the discussion will be on how schools have failed Black girls. And so it will take the same format as the discussion that we had last week, and I'll send details of that to everybody who's registered as well. So the next question, somebody has asked, is there anything you'd advise teaching assistants and non-teaching staff to do more of? Sometimes it feels like our options for direct impact are more limited compared to teachers and senior leadership teams. So any examples would be really helpful. And then they said they've already taken some examples from what people have suggested, and I thank you. So does anybody want to come into that? Something that teaching assistants and non-teaching staff could do within the space?
Specifically in supporting Black students?
Yeah.
Black peoples? Yeah. I'll let Ziggy go first. I had something after.
I was going to refer, I think, I was going to say something Manny said. I'm just going to reinforce creating a safe space for Black children in schools. Like, you're going to get the microaggressions. I think one time I used to have a group of Black students who used to come to my class every lunchtime, and a teacher came in and said, oh, is this the Black gang and this and the other? You're going to get that. But I think ensuring that there is a safe space, I think Manny described one with his teachers and so on and so forth, and almost bearing the brunt of the, for want of a better phrase, foolishness that you're going to receive, the comments, the looks and whatever, to ensure that they have that space, because it becomes so vital, especially in a school where Black children are the minority and they're having to go through certain things every single day. So if it's a classroom they can come to at lunch, if it's a group you're going to start, just do it and don't feel any way, because you know what they're going to say. So, sorry, that's it.
Manny?
Yeah, Ziggy quoted me, and I was just going to say something similar, forgetting that I had said that. But yeah, creating a safe space. I'd also throw in there, I was a TA for 4 years, maybe before I became a teacher. TAs are as valuable as any other member in the school, first and foremost. And you know what, if it wasn't for the financial situation that I was in, I would have loved to continue staying as a TA. I never actually aspired to be a teacher. And one, I felt that I actually had a greater relationship and a greater opportunity to impact the young people within my school, especially the vulnerable ones, more so as a TA than I feel as a teacher. Obviously the influence is different, and I think the higher you go up in school, the influence is different because you dictate more the structures, the policies, the systems that the school operates in. But as a TA, for me, that was probably the best time I've had in a school. And the reason why I say that is because the first young person I worked with was a young Black boy who was statemented at the time with behavioral difficulties, ADHD, the whole shebang. And when I first came in, they said, you know, this boy, he's barely in the lessons. He doesn't have much hope of getting his SATs in a year's time, all of that stuff. And I worked with him. And if I'm being honest, there wasn't no magic formula. I was just myself. Again, representation matters. He was able to express things to me that maybe he wasn't able to express to other staff members. I tried my best to understand him, and so I gave him opportunities to go out for breaks, and I had to be his advocate. You know, what the teachers weren't prepared to do or what they weren't prepared to understand, you as a one-to-one TA or a classroom TA, you have the opportunity to learn about that young person more and be an advocate for them. And so I would 100% say that creating a safe space for them, maybe for whole groups, but definitely recognizing that you have a massive say or a massive impact in the lives of young people, and not just the young people, the families as well, because the relationship that the mum had with the school was dire. As in, she'd be coming in school and everyone knows that she's in the school because she's screaming off. And what I did was I was able to kind of bridge a gap between the relationship between the school and the parent, because I was just being myself. I was prepared to listen to her. I was prepared to hear her advice. She didn't want her child to take certain medications. I had to, you know, explain to the school, this is why. And so when you're doing that, you're an advocate for the child. And so you might not be able to do some grand presentation for all the staff members in your school, but just understand that your role, even as a TA, whether it's creating a space or just being very good at your job. And also I'd suggest, in every way possible, even as a TA, do as much CPD as possible. It's not exclusive to teachers. I went out and did courses and asked to be on courses that I thought would benefit me and the young people in the long term. So that's another suggestion as well.
And Manny, that leads us very nicely into the next question. Somebody's asked, have you got any suggestions for what can be done around CPD? So what schools can recommend as CPD? So does anybody have any thoughts?
So suggestions as to what CPD schools can
take?
Schools in general, not members of staff, that schools can take.
Yeah.
I have to be honest, I don't know just yet specifically about CPDs that whole school that the whole school can take. I do know of educators who have written blogs, reports, and there's resources out for individual members of staff or for groups of staff to use and to help them. But I don't know if there's any CPD events that have been created at this moment in time specifically for that. I'm sure there is, but if people message me or email me, I'm more than happy to direct them to other educators who I know have produced work and resources that could be used for CPD, definitely.
I would also say if any schools want to bring me in, if there are any head teachers who want to bring me in to work with their staff, I'll be more than happy to work with their staff. You can either follow me on Instagram at moreeducation01, or you can email me at info@moreeducation.co.uk. I'd be more than willing to come and work with your staff and developing how we can create a more positive atmosphere for Black children and boost and improve attainment and reduce exclusions in your school. So I look forward to hearing from some of the educators in the room.
Brilliant. And can all of our panelists please put whatever contact details they are comfortable with in the chat as well, because there's been a few requests for people to reach out to you. The only other thing I would say in response to that question is I'd recommend that schools get in touch and get to know the organisations that exist around them. There are a number of organisations that do work around raising awareness of a number of the issues that we've addressed today. So it's just about doing some of your research and then bringing in people that are experts in the area that you're looking for. And looking outside of the box and not doing just your traditional CPD, but thinking, what do the young people in our school actually need and what do the staff need and where can we find that expertise? Melissa, were you going to respond to that question?
Yeah, I was just going to actually, leading on from what Ziggy said, I created a workshop called Black History Month for Dummies and White Teachers. And even though I created it, my school that my daughter's at is still willing to have me in the school to do it. So there has to be a willingness. It doesn't matter how much we push things into people's faces to try and educate them about their practices. if they're not willing to listen, they're just not willing to listen, you know. And I've had one governor who's come and attended one of the workshops, but the actual head or the people within the school haven't done it. And I created that last year, and it's really fitting now because lots of people are interested in it now because of what's taking place. So yeah.
All right, brilliant. And then next question, how would you advise a supplementary education organisation to go about advocating for students and or improve the relationship and communication between school and family? So I think this is somebody that's saying, what can a supplementary education organisation do to advocate? Ziggy?
I'm going to jump in there because that's something that we do. I think I think working specifically with the parents, making sure that the parents are informed. So something at No More Exclusion that we're currently putting together is almost like a flow chart. I'm still in the process of putting it together of has your child, so parents, it's a clear process that they know to go for, because a lot of parents are very reluctant to go into meetings with senior leaders, just any issues in regards to their behaviors. And I think culturally, I know this was the case, I know this is the case with a lot of parents, because there's that whole concept and idea, and we can't escape it, of authority, of white authority, of many of our parents are brilliantly uneducated. So when put into that situation, especially if we're first generation immigrants, some English isn't their first language. So depending on the community in which you live in or the community in which you serve, ensure that you're able to put together, even if it's a one sheet pack on what you can do to, if you're called into a meeting, translate into those languages that are local to your community. So for me, it'd be like flipping Somali, that has to be in Somali. It has to be in, has to be in French for a lot of our Congolese community, and open yourself up for possible drop-in workshops as something that we do, and that's to really boost the parents and ensure that they feel they have somebody to speak to that's completely outside of the school system. And if you're able to, go to the meetings. I've been to a lot of meetings, I ain't been paid, but it's made a difference.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Does anybody else want to contribute to that question? And then we've got one more final question I'm going to get to, and then we're going to finish off, is trying to pick one that hasn't been responded to already. Okay, how can Black men be encouraged to become teachers and leaders, especially in primary school? So how can we start to encourage young boys to think of teaching and leadership positions from primary school? Manny, I can see you rubbing your head already. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, solutions. I think similar to something that me and Ziggy said earlier, is you have to destigmatize the idea that that Black men in education isn't normal. The reason why I say that is because I received a lot of backlash from my family, particularly my dad, when I told him I'd be a teacher, to the point where I don't think he wanted to talk to me for a little while. And in hindsight, I understand why, because his experience of education in Nigeria kind of informs what he then believes teachers are and what education is like. And so although he's very passionate about education, even to this day, he still questions and challenges me as to why it is that I'm a teacher. Don't I want to get into something else? And so I think it's a cultural thing that we have to break down as well. I think we have to have honest discussions. I think those of us that are in it, I think we have to have honest discussions with people that are interested about it, around the pros and the cons. But I think ultimately, when there's a lack of Black male educators, it's very hard to promote it. It's very hard for young people to want to aspire to do that. That's the honest truth. And so the way to encourage it, I would say, is, I think the more Black men that you have in education that then go to that reach the pinnacle, become head teachers, become SLT members, I would like to think or hope that that would kind of then encourage the young people, at least within the school, to then consider it as, oh, actually, it's normal to become, you know, a black teacher or a black head teacher. Sir over there, who was raised from down the road as me, is a teacher, and he still speaks the same lingo as me. He understands my background. It has to be normalized. So I'd say definitely that it has to be destigmatized within the culture. I'm going to say specifically the West African culture, because that's where I've seen a lot of backlash from it. And you know, it's one of my missions, and I haven't got the answers for it now, but definitely something I'm going to be working on with anyone that's prepared to work on that with me, is to promote it. And whether that's through promotional videos, whether it's just, I don't know, but it is something I'm interested in doing. So, I mean, Ziggy might have some more suggestions, but it is an issue. I don't know if there's a straight, obvious solution as to how to get them in there. Maybe if you throw 50, 60 grand at them,
Yeah.
I'm sure you get enough men, if they realize they could get into it and make good money, they would do it. So yeah.
Just a quick one as a black educator. I think that Manny touched on it. I think more importantly than having black men in education, it's to show that that the common theme amongst black men is there are many educated black men. So it's not necessarily so as Manny said, in a Zoom conference meeting among many professionals, you can speak like this. However, if you need to relate to a youth and straight, you can talk like that, and it's fine to be able to switch it up. So the key is to ensure that our children, the dominant image and idea that they have of black men is that they are educated. And currently that's not the problem, because once they understand that that should be the go-to, that's standard, as it is in many other communities, you'll naturally see a progression of people who are educated who want to go into education, as opposed to black people who need to be in education. We need black people in all different walks of life in society who are educated, and it will naturally be a progression. So I think that's the thing that needs to change, something that we might need to kind of promote, that education among black men is quite standard.
Yeah, I agree with Ziggy. Very good point.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you just doesn't even seem like enough. All of you were incredible. Thank you for being so generous with your time, for sharing your experiences and your expertise, and for giving so many actionable strategies that people can take away. So this isn't a talk shop. This is about sharing experiences, but also giving people things to practically go away and take into their workplace on Wednesday, tomorrow, when they're having those conversations with their colleagues, with their children, with community members. Thank you so much. Everybody who's attended, please know that if you've registered for this and you're here, you will have access to this video on demand, and the registration link is going to remain open for the rest of the week. So anybody who hasn't been able to attend can still register to view the video. I'm also going to send out a link and also a tweet to let you know when the next discussion is taking place in a couple of weeks' time. But there's nothing else left to say other than Manny, Nadine, Ziggy and Melissa, thank you so much. Blessings. Have a good day, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye guys, see you.